They say power walks softly. It doesn't always wear a uniform or arrive with sirens. Sometimes it shows up early, dressed in quiet confidence, with nothing but purpose in its eyes. On a crisp morning in Millstone, a town where change moved slower than traffic in winter, a black woman stepped out of a hybrid SUV and approached City Hall. She wasn't flanked by cameras. There was no ribbon to cut, no speech to deliver. Just one woman, freshly appointed, ready to get to work. Her name was Maya Henderson, a civil rights attorney turned mayor-elect, newly chosen by the people to lead a town that had never seen someone like her hold that kind of office. Her first act in office wasn't symbolic. She didn't want headlines. She wanted reform, real reform, accountability, oversight, transparency. She believed in law enforcement, but also in law being enforced on everyone, including those who wore the badge. She had barely made it 10 steps toward the marble stairs when she heard the voice behind her. "Hey, what do you think you're doing?" A uniformed officer, white, tall, aggressive. His tone was flat but laced with suspicion. Maya paused, turned slowly, and replied calmly, "I have business inside." He looked her over, unimpressed. "Identification?" She raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because this building isn't open to the public right now," he snapped. "And you look out of place." The words hung in the air like smoke. Out of place. As if the sidewalk beneath her wasn't hers. As if her skin tone had walked ahead of her resume. Before she could say another word, his hands were on her wrist, rough, unapologetic. "Turn around," he barked. "You're being detained." The scene unfolded in slow motion. A woman, elected to uphold the law, was shoved against a government vehicle by the very person tasked with defending her rights. People watched. Some pulled out phones. Others looked away. But no one stepped in. What the officer didn't know, what he couldn't have imagined, was that the woman he was cuffing wasn't just another face. She wasn't lost. She wasn't loitering. She was his boss. Across the plaza, a City Hall aide came sprinting out, eyes wide, waving his hands. "That's the mayor! You just arrested the mayor!" But it was too late. The squad car was already pulling away. And inside, Maya Henderson wasn't panicking. She was planning. Because power doesn't always shout. Sometimes it waits for the right moment, then redefines the rules. Millstone had always looked calm on the outside. White picket fences, hand-painted storefronts, church bells on Sunday, and parades on Memorial Day. But for those who paid attention, especially people who didn't fit the town's image, that calm was an illusion. The real Millstone was a town stitched together by generations of unspoken rules. It wasn't written anywhere, but everyone knew what side of town to live on, who got second interviews, who the police let off with warnings, and who they stopped for random checks. It was the kind of place where a black family moving into a white neighborhood was still called bold, where people said things like, "We treat everyone the same," but always locked their doors a little faster when a stranger didn't look like them. Maya Henderson knew this town. She was born here, raised in the South Side, where streetlights flickered and playgrounds cracked under years of budget cuts. Her mother cleaned houses. Her father worked night shifts at the warehouse. But Maya's mind was sharp and her will unshakable. She earned scholarships, skipped grades, graduated magna cum laude from Howard, and then attended law school at the University of Chicago. She became a civil rights attorney known for holding police departments accountable. Maya didn't just know the law, she wielded it like a scalpel. Her return to Millstone wasn't about nostalgia, it was about unfinished business. When the town opened up its first competitive mayoral election in decades, after the retirement of Mayor Henry Brooks, who'd held office for 22 years, Maya saw her chance. Not to decorate the office with family photos, but to strip it down and rebuild it. She ran on a platform of public safety reform, transparent government, and community investment. She promised civilian oversight of law enforcement, body camera mandates, equity audits, and budget reallocations. People called it Radical. She called it long overdue. The election was brutal. Her opponents, 3 local businessmen and a retired police captain, mocked her, called her too big city, too young, too loud. But what really unsettled them was that she was too clear. Her vision wasn't soft or vague, it was surgical. And she had numbers, statistics, case studies, and facts. She didn't just call for police reform, she explained line by line how it would be implemented. When she walked into town halls, people listened. Even those who didn't like her started taking notes. She won the election by less than 3%. But it was enough. Enough to send shockwaves through the town council, the police department, and the local paper's editorial board. For the first time in Millstone's history, a black woman, born in the neighborhood people used to avoid after dark, was going to sit at the head of government. Her victory photo went viral. From South Side to City Hall, the headlines read, Black Excellence, Civil Rights in Action, Local Politics Transformed. But victory on paper didn't translate to support behind closed doors. Within days of her win, anonymous notes began arriving at City Hall. She doesn't represent us. Millstone isn't ready. Stick to Chicago. Some were more direct. We watch who comes in, and we'll be watching you. Maya didn't flinch. She'd seen worse. But she noticed how some staff avoided eye contact, how certain department heads forgot to invite her to key meetings, and how the police department, which technically answered to her now, hadn't formally welcomed her, or even acknowledged her presence. One officer in particular stood out. Sergeant David Bradley, 10 years on the force, decorated, charismatic, and dangerous in the way confidence can be weaponized by someone who's never had to question their authority. He was known for keeping order, which often meant over-policing the same neighborhoods Maya grew up in. He wasn't outwardly hostile, just subtly dismissive. When Maya attended her first briefing as mayor-elect, Bradley didn't rise when she entered the room. He didn't say her name when he spoke. He just referred to leadership and made eye contact with the wall behind her. She noted it, quietly, strategically. She wasn't there to be liked. She was there to change things. She began reviewing internal audits, requesting body cam reports, and flagging misconduct complaints that had mysteriously vanished from official databases. And she kept working, knowing full well that someone like Bradley wouldn't make their move in a meeting room. No. People like him waited until you were alone, unguarded, unfamiliar. That's why she had chosen to go alone on her first day. No media, no escort, just herself, walking into City Hall as any public servant should be able to. She wanted to set a tone, not of fear, but of ownership, responsibility, strength. But clearly, the system she was about to lead hadn't gotten the message. And now, as she sat in the back of a squad car, hands cuffed in front of her tailored blazer, she was already calculating the next move. Not if she'd respond. How? Because every camera on that street, hers, theirs, the bystanders, had captured something bigger than just one wrongful arrest. It had captured a town's resistance to change, and one woman's refusal to let them get away with it. She wasn't going to wait for the news to break. She was the news, and the footage was already on its way. Back at City Hall, word of Maya's arrest spread like gasoline over flame. The front desk assistant, a kind woman named Ruth, was the first to hear it from a bystander who rushed inside. "They just took her," the man whispered out of breath. "The mayor, Officer Bradley, no warning." Ruth's eyes widened, her hands trembled. "Took her where?" she asked. "The police station," he said. I think he thought she was a threat." Ruth immediately called the city manager's office, but no one picked up. She ran to the window and stared down the street, praying this wasn't real. It was real, and it was already becoming bigger than Millstone. In a modest apartment above the local newspaper office, Maya's campaign manager, Danielle Ruiz, was halfway through her second cup of coffee when her phone buzzed. "Mayor arrested?" The subject line of a forwarded tweet read. Her stomach dropped. She tapped the link. There it was, grainy footage, taken from a parked car across the street, showing a white police officer shoving a well-dressed black woman into a cruiser. Even without seeing Maya's face, Danielle knew. The posture, the poise, the refusal to beg. It was her. Within 5 minutes, Danielle had activated the crisis protocol. She called Maya's assistant. She called 2 local journalists. She even called a civil rights attorney Maya had worked with in Chicago. This wasn't just a PR issue. It was a constitutional one, a political one, and possibly, depending on how it unfolded, a national one. Danielle didn't panic. She planned. The first step was to make sure Maya was safe. The second was to make sure the world knew exactly why she wasn't. Meanwhile, inside the police station, Maya was led to a processing room. Officer Bradley hadn't stopped talking since they arrived, comments laced with condescension, smirking pride, and an underlying threat. "Next time, maybe you'll think twice before sneaking around official buildings," he said. "You're lucky we don't file charges." Maya didn't flinch. "You're lucky I'm not pressing mine, yet." She looked directly into the wall-mounted surveillance camera as she said it. Sergeant Whitmore, the officer in charge of intake, was already sweating. He wasn't in on the arrest, hadn't been briefed, and now he was standing in front of a woman who, if the name she gave was accurate, wasn't just a visitor. She was the mayor. We might need to clarify something," he mumbled to Bradley. "There's a chance she's bluffing," Bradley snapped. "No ID, no appointment, no record. Anyone can claim to be mayor." But even as he spoke, his own phone buzzed. And then buzzed again. A text from his wife. "Is that the new mayor in the back of your car? It's all over Twitter." Another from a friend. "Bro, did you arrest the mayor? Tell me this is fake." Bradley went pale. His eyes darted to Maya, who was still calm, still composed. "What's that expression?" she said, tilting her head slightly. "Oh, right. You messed around. Now you're about to find out." Still, Maya wasn't satisfied with just watching Bradley squirm. This wasn't about payback. It was about precedent. She requested a phone call and used it not to contact a lawyer, but to dictate a press statement to her assistant. Her tone was measured, but every word hit like a gavel. "Today," she said, "the mayor of Millstone was unlawfully detained without cause during lawful entry into a government building. I will not respond with anger. I will respond with truth. And the truth is, this town deserves better. Better leadership, better protection, better law enforcement. And that begins right now." The station receptionist, who had been listening through a cracked door, quietly started typing. 2 minutes later, that statement hit Maya's official campaign social media pages, and the public reaction was instant. Thousands of views, hundreds of comments. People from Millstone, nearby towns, and across the country began weighing in. This is why we need police accountability. Another example of systemic bias. She's the mayor and still got profiled. Imagine if she wasn't. Hashtags began trending. Hashtag justice for Maya. Arrested while black. Hash know your mayor. Cable news picked up the story within the hour. By now, the chief of police, who had just returned from a conference in Atlanta, was on the phone with the governor's office, trying to explain how his department had just unlawfully detained an elected official on her first day in office. The governor, a moderate Democrat facing re-election, wasn't pleased. "Fix this," he said, voice sharp. "Today." Back in Millstone, as the pressure built from every direction, the political machine inside City Hall was struggling to contain the fallout. The city council, many of whom had hoped Maya would be a symbolic leader rather than a functional one, were now forced to reckon with reality. She wasn't just symbolic. She was strategic. She had public support, national attention, and every legal and moral high ground. Bradley tried to backpedal. "She didn't identify herself," he argued. "I was doing my job." But the footage said otherwise. His language, his tone, his refusal to even consider that a black woman in a suit could be a public official, it wasn't just a mistake. It was biased, caught on camera. At 2:13 p.m., just 6 hours after her unlawful arrest, Maya Henderson was released without charge. No apology, no explanation. But Maya didn't ask for one. She stepped out of the station, faced the crowd of reporters now gathered outside, and said simply, "Thank you for being here. I have work to do." Then she turned and walked straight back to City Hall. Maya didn't waste time. The moment she stepped back into City Hall, still in the same blazer she had been handcuffed in, she gathered her chief of staff, legal advisor, and communications team into the council chamber. No one asked how she was. They didn't need to. Her posture told them she was fine. More than fine. She was focused and dangerous. Not because she wanted revenge, but because she now held the receipts. She began by requesting the body cam footage, not just from Officer Bradley, but from every responding unit in the vicinity. Her legal advisor informed her they were entitled to request copies under the Public Records Act, and Maya made sure that request went through within the hour. Simultaneously, she instructed her team to contact every local outlet, civil rights coalition, and public integrity group in the state. "We're not going to wait for the truth to trickle out," she said. "We'll lead with it." Meanwhile, the video captured by bystanders was already gaining momentum. Uploaded to multiple social media platforms, the footage showed not just the arrest, but the attitude behind it. Bradley towering over Maya, barking orders, ignoring her calm explanations. The algorithm favored it. Wrongful arrest, black woman detained, civil rights violation, abuse of power. Each keyword in the title helped the clip soar. Views turned into outrage, outrage turned into headlines, and those headlines carried her name. By 5 p.m., Maya was trending on 3 platforms. National commentators began weighing in. Former attorneys general, civil rights activists, even celebrities. If this can happen to a sitting mayor, imagine what happens off-camera to people with no platform, one tweet read. A viral TikTok stitched her arrest with her campaign promise for justice reform and police accountability, captioned, "She warned them, they didn't listen." But Maya wasn't just letting the internet rage, she was laying the groundwork. That evening, she called a special public session for the next morning. Legally, as mayor, she had the authority to do so. The agenda? Community trust and police oversight. She drafted it personally. Every bullet point was a surgical strike. Review of body cam policies. Audit of racial profiling complaints from the last 5 years. Independent Civilian Review Board proposal. Motion to suspend Sergeant David Bradley pending investigation. The following day, the council chamber overflowed. Citizens who had never attended a town meeting showed up in droves. Reporters lined the walls. Students live-streamed the event. And at the center of it all stood Maya. No podium, no teleprompter, just her voice. She began, "Some of you saw what happened to me. Some of you heard about it. But this isn't about me. This is about what happens when systems forget who they serve. It's about accountability, not for punishment's sake, but for the public's trust. Because if I can be treated like a suspect while wearing the title of mayor, then who's safe when no one's watching?" Gasps echoed softly in the room. She continued, showing a series of data slides on the projector. Disproportionate stops of black residents, excessive force incidents dismissed without follow-up, complaints lost in paperwork. She didn't shout. She didn't need to. Her numbers did the yelling. And when she pulled up the audio clip from her own arrest, specifically Bradley saying, "You don't belong here," the room turned electric. That was the turning point. Council members who had privately dismissed her as an idealist began shifting in their seats. They realized this wasn't political theater. It was public reckoning. Maya then turned the floor over to the public. One by one, residents came up, some angry, some trembling, some in tears. A high school teacher described being followed home by police 3 nights in a row. A retired veteran said he'd stopped calling 911 because it brought more danger than help. And then came Tracy Monroes, the police intern who had stood frozen that morning outside the station. Tracy stepped forward, holding a small note in her hand. Her voice quivered, but her words were clear. "I didn't know what to do. I saw it happen. I saw how they treated her. Not because she did something wrong, but because they didn't think someone like her could be mayor. And I didn't speak up. But I am now. The room erupted in applause. Maya gave a slight nod, no emotion on her face, but a fire in her eyes. Tracy's testimony wasn't just brave, it was damning, because it came from inside the system. A first-hand witness, a young woman of color. A future law enforcement officer was already burned by the institution she hoped to serve. At the conclusion of the session, Maya made her final move for the day. She introduced a temporary administrative order, a formal motion to place Officer Bradley on immediate suspension without pay, pending full investigation. It passed 5-2. Bradley wasn't present, but he didn't have to be. The statement was clear. This town had turned a corner, and it wasn't turning back. By noon the next day, the headlines had shifted from speculation to certainty. Mayor launches investigation into police department that detained her. Media outlets across the country began using Maya Henderson's name as shorthand for a new era of leadership, one that wasn't afraid to challenge power from within. But for Maya, the news cycle wasn't the victory. The real win was still ahead. She knew the town's resistance ran deeper than just one arrest or one bad cop. The silence from the city council before the public backlash said more than any vote. The fact that no one from the police department, not even the chief, had reached out to her personally was all the proof she needed that this wasn't about a misunderstanding. It was about protectionism. A broken chain of command protects itself at the expense of the public. So, she did what any good lawyer does when the truth isn't enough. She built a case. First, she ordered a full internal audit of the department's complaint history. She hired an outside firm with no ties to Millstone, ensuring there would be no cover-ups. She requested every report involving the use of force over the past decade and instructed her legal team to cross-reference the data with racial demographics. The initial numbers were staggering. Over 80% of stops categorized as routine had involved residents of color, despite the town being majority white. Most of those incidents had been filed away as non-escalated. But Maya knew what that really meant. They never got reported because victims didn't feel safe enough to complain. Then came the real strike. Maya contacted the State Civil Rights Division and invited them to conduct an independent oversight review of Millstone PD. It was a bold move, one no mayor in town history had ever dared to make. But Maya knew the only way to rebuild trust was to stop asking the system to police itself. Within 48 hours, a team from the Attorney General's office was on the ground, unsealing records and reviewing internal protocols. What they found wasn't just negligence, it was a culture of quiet immunity. While the state investigation ramped up, Maya took her message to the people. She hosted a town hall in the very auditorium where she had announced her campaign just months earlier. This time, the seats were packed with reporters, activists, city workers, and families, black, white, Latino, Asian, all of them listening as she spoke not with outrage, but with unflinching moral clarity. "Justice doesn't come from punishment," she said. "It comes from standards. And when institutions fail to uphold them, we don't abandon those institutions, we rebuild them, stronger, smarter, with people who serve, not intimidate, with leadership that listens." It wasn't just a speech, it was a blueprint. By the end of that week, Maya had unveiled a multi-phase police reform and civic trust initiative, including creation of a permanent civilian review board with full subpoena power, implementation of bias training and certification for every officer, reviewed annually, mandatory public town halls for officers accused of misconduct before disciplinary hearings, a transparent dashboard tracking complaints, stops, and use of force, updated monthly and accessible to the public. She didn't need applause, she needed change, and that's exactly what began to happen. Other cities took notice. Mayors from neighboring counties reached out for copies of her reform package. A feature in The Atlantic called her one of the most courageous new voices in American civic reform. Civil rights organizations pledged legal and financial support. Even state senators began to echo her language on the floor of the legislature. But perhaps the most unexpected response came from inside the police department. After weeks of silence, a group of young officers requested a private meeting with Maya. They had seen the writing on the wall. The system was changing, and they wanted to be part of it. Not all of them, of course. Some would resign quietly. Others would fight the reforms. But a new generation was stepping forward, asking for a seat at the table, not to protect their own, but to protect the people. Still, one loose thread remained: Officer Bradley. He had been suspended, yes, but not yet dismissed. His union was fighting back, threatening legal action, painting him as a good officer caught in a bad moment. Maya didn't respond publicly. She didn't need to. Instead, she waited. Waited until the state's preliminary report was complete, and when it was, she released it in full at a press conference. The findings were damning: misconduct, patterned profiling, retaliation against complainants, manipulation of evidence logs, and at the center of multiple flagged cases, Sergeant David Bradley. The next morning, Maya submitted a formal recommendation for termination, not just for Bradley, but for the 3 senior officers who had shielded him for years. And this time the council didn't hesitate. The vote was unanimous. No ceremony, no farewell speech, just a line of consequence drawn in ink. As Bradley packed his things and walked out of the department for the last time, he passed by Tracy Monroes, the intern who once stood silent. She didn't gloat, didn't smirk. She just nodded and kept walking. Because Maya had taught her something more powerful than defiance: dignity in action. By the end of the month, Millstone had a new reputation, not for scandal, but for reform. The town, once frozen in fear of change, had become a model for how leadership rooted in truth, strategy, and courage could shatter old systems and build something better. And it all started with one woman, one wrongful arrest, and the decision to say, "This ends with me." Maya knew the real danger wasn't in one man, it was in what the system allowed him to become. And as the cameras packed up after Bradley's termination, she understood something the public didn't yet see. That moment was only the end of the surface story. The real war was deeper, quieter, and far more entrenched. 2 days later, Maya received a sealed envelope delivered by hand to her office. No return address. Inside, copies of internal emails between ranking officers, including the now suspended chief. Emails from weeks before her arrest. Subject lines like, "Do we have eyes on her?" and "Security protocols when the mayor enters premises." One message, marked confidential, read, "If she wants transparency, let's give her a taste of what real oversight feels like." Another, "No cameras when she arrives, nothing official." Maya stared at the paper for several seconds. It wasn't incompetence that led to her detainment. It was coordination. That was the twist. Her arrest hadn't just been racial profiling, it had been a targeted power play, an act of intimidation designed to send a message. But instead of silencing her, they had given her the last piece she needed. It was no longer about reform. It was about federal intervention. Maya picked up the phone and called the one person she knew would understand the stakes: Carmen Ellis, Regional Director of the U.S. Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division. They had met years ago at a legal conference on qualified immunity. Carmen had once told Maya, "When the system closes ranks, don't knock, bring a wrecking bar." Maya didn't knock. 3 days later, the DOJ launched a preliminary inquiry into Millstone's police department and city government, probing not just the arrest, but the culture of selective enforcement, manipulation of records, and systemic retaliation. Maya held a press conference the same afternoon. She didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She laid it out in full. "What happened to me was not a mistake," she said. "It was a deliberate act by those who feared accountability. But fear will not run this town. Transparency will. The rule of law will. And from this day forward, Millstone will not just comply, it will lead." The reaction was electric. National headlines erupted. DOJ investigates town that arrested its own mayor. Cable news booked Maya for nightly interviews. Her face was everywhere: CNN, MSNBC, The View, even late-night segments. But what the world saw as justice in motion, some in Millstone still saw as an attack. Opposition mounted fast. Former city officials, police union representatives, and even some council members began framing Maya's actions as overreach. Flyers were distributed accusing her of weaponizing race, of bringing shame to the town, and of using federal power to settle personal scores. The narrative was ugly, but predictable. Maya didn't blink. She called for a community forum, not in the polished council chamber, but outside, in the park at the center of town. She wanted everyone: the critics, the undecideds, the angry, the afraid. Hundreds showed up. Some came to support, some came to challenge, some came just to stare. But Maya stood beneath a simple wooden gazebo, no microphone, no security, and faced them all. An older white man raised his hand first. "You're tearing this town apart," he said. "There are good cops here, good people. Why bring the feds into this?" Maya nodded. "You're right," she said. "There are good officers, and I'm doing this for them too. Because a good cop in a broken system either becomes part of it or becomes a target. I've spoken to young officers who want change but don't feel safe asking for it. I'm not tearing anything apart. I'm pulling back the curtain so we can fix what's behind it." Another voice shouted, "What about forgiveness? What about moving on?" Maya didn't raise her voice. "Forgiveness without accountability isn't justice," she said. "It's forgetting. And we've forgotten too much for too long." That moment, under a cloudy sky, surrounded by tension and questions, was where the tide finally turned. Because what Maya offered wasn't just reform, it was honesty. It was leadership without spectacle. And even those who didn't fully agree began to trust her intent. Behind the scenes, the DOJ inquiry accelerated. Whistleblowers came forward. A retired officer turned over a USB drive containing audio files from internal meetings where high-ranking staff openly joked about manipulating data and harassing activists. One file included Bradley himself referring to Maya as a PR stunt in heels. That quote hit every headline the next morning. But Maya didn't gloat. She called a press conference and did something few expected. She invited every active duty officer in Millstone to attend. Most didn't, but enough came, and those who did stood silently as she addressed the town one more time. "You can rebuild trust," she said, "but not through silence, not through excuses, through courage, through ownership, through service that actually protects." Then she turned to the officers standing off to the side. "If you're willing to stand with this town, not just enforce laws but embody justice, you will not stand alone. But you have to choose." A few stepped forward, not many, but enough. And when they did, the crowd didn't cheer. They exhaled. Because something had shifted. In the weeks that followed, the Department of Justice escalated its inquiry into a full-scale federal investigation. Not just into the Millstone Police Department, but into the governance structure that enabled abuse, erased complaints, and silenced dissent. The audit uncovered discrepancies in budgeting, backroom promotions, and years of unreported civilian grievances. It wasn't one rogue officer. It was an ecosystem built to shield itself. And as the findings poured in, Maya didn't wait to be told what to do. She drafted an executive proposal to restructure Millstone's entire policing model. Community policing would be the foundation, but not just in name, in practice. Every officer would be reassigned through a trust-based district system. No officer could work in a neighborhood without completing public accountability training, citizen engagement hours, and quarterly public reviews. She also introduced a Truth and Reconciliation Initiative, something rarely seen at the municipal level. It wasn't performative. It was real. Former victims of misconduct were invited to speak. Officers were invited to listen. and those willing to participate in formal restorative justice programs could reduce disciplinary consequences through active service and public apology. Some called it radical. Maya called it justice with memory. At the state level, Maya's name began surfacing in legislative conversations. One senator proposed a Henderson rule, requiring independent oversight panels in any city where a mayor or elected official has been unlawfully detained. Several cities reached out for her reform model. A university even asked her to keynote a conference on black female leadership in local government. But Maya didn't celebrate, not yet. Because amidst the progress, there were still people whispering that she had gone too far, that she'd stirred things up that were better left alone, that maybe Millstone had been just fine before she came back. So she kept working. One afternoon, Maya visited the high school where she'd once sat in the back row of a crumbling civics classroom. This time, she stood at the front. Dozens of students, most of them black and brown, stared at her like they were looking at something they'd never imagined was possible. Power that looked like them. She spoke with honesty. I wasn't supposed to make it here. And even when I did, they tried to remind me I didn't belong. But here's what they didn't count on. I knew who I was before I walked through their doors. And that's what protected me more than a badge or a title ever could. That line would later go viral. But in the room, it landed differently. It wasn't content, it was the truth. And it cracked something open in every student who had ever been told they were too much or not enough or out of place in their own town. Not long after, something remarkable happened. Tracy Monroes, the police intern who had once stood frozen in fear, applied for a position on the new Civilian Oversight Committee. Maya swore her in personally. You once said nothing, Maya told her quietly. Now you'll make sure no one else has to. Even Bradley's resignation wasn't the end. A federal lawsuit followed. Not from Maya, but from a coalition of former complainants who now had legal standing under the DOJ's expanded case. Maya, though not involved, was called to testify, and she did, calmly and directly, never once using the word revenge, because that wasn't the point. This wasn't about retribution. It was about rebuilding the blueprint. And when the town eventually reached a civil settlement with the victims, Maya announced that a portion of the funds would go toward building the Center for Civic Justice and Training, a new community hub focused on legal education, youth leadership, and municipal transparency. It would be housed in the old police annex, the same place where she had once been held without cause, a quiet, full-circle moment. By the time the DOJ closed its investigation, Millstone had not only complied with every federal recommendation, it had exceeded them. The report concluded with a phrase no one had expected to read. Millstone may now serve as a model for civil rights-aligned governance at the municipal level. Maya didn't print it, she didn't post it, but she kept the line tucked into her desk drawer, not as a trophy, but as a reminder of what's possible when you refuse to be reduced. Because at the end of the day, she wasn't the woman they tried to scare into silence. She was the one who rewrote the rules. It would have been easy to walk away. After the lawsuits, after the reforms, after the press moved on to the next crisis, and the internet found a new story to trend, Maya could have stepped back, taken a break, let someone else carry the baton. But that was never the point. Some months after the federal investigation closed, she returned to the plaza where it had all started. City Hall stood unchanged from the outside. The same brick walls, the same aging staircase. But the people inside were different. The process was different. The power that had once been hidden was now transparent, accountable, and seen. Maya stood under the same gazebo where she had once faced a crowd of skeptics. This time there was no speech. Just silence. The kind that comes after storms. Not the silence of fear, but of peace earned. A young girl approached her with a notebook in hand, maybe 13, hair in braids, sneakers unlaced. Are you the mayor? She asked, eyes wide. Maya smiled. Yes, but you can call me Maya. The girl hesitated, then said, I saw what they did to you. I watched it online. My mom said you didn't yell even when they hurt you. Maya crouched slightly, looked the girl in the eye. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stay calm, because then every word you say after that, it hits harder. The girl nodded slowly, then handed Maya her notebook. Inside was a drawing. A black woman in a suit, one fist in the air, the other holding a rolled-up document that said, "The law." "I want to be like you," she whispered. Maya didn't reply right away. She just held the notebook close. Because moments like that didn't need speeches. They were the speeches. Later that day, as she looked out her office window, Maya thought about the irony. They had tried to remind her she didn't belong. But in doing so, they reminded the entire country why she did. She didn't win by overpowering them. She won by outlasting them, by refusing to trade dignity for rage, by choosing reform over revenge, and by building something too real to tear down. She wasn't there to make noise. She was there to change the frequency. And she did. If you've ever been told you don't belong, remember this: your presence alone is powerful. But your persistence? That's what makes history. Maya Henderson didn't just survive injustice. She exposed it, dismantled it, and rebuilt what stood behind it. One act of abuse, one act of courage, and a town forever changed. If this story moved you, share it. Because for every Maya, there's someone still waiting to be heard. And justice, real justice, doesn't come from silence. It comes from stories. Stories like this.